Episode 5 of Territory begins with a flashback where Daniel has decided to sell Marianne to Sandra so he can pay off their debts. Emily refuses as they had a deal to run the station together. He just laughs and she shoots at him. Angered, he kicks her and Graham out of the station. As he leaves, she shoots at his horse, which drops him, and she leaves. At present, she tells Elton that she just meant to scare Daniel. He will keep her secret, but he wants the sacred cave, sorry place. And to do that, she needs to stop Sandra from building a road through it and keep the Aboriginal community away. She agrees, and he takes the horse, wondering if she will stab him in the back like Daniel. Meanwhile, Sandra announces her deal with Keeley. She has been granted access to create a road via the Aboriginal community's land, which will provide employment and resources to the people. Bryce and Colin are not happy about this. Sandra also bails Graham out and tells him to pay back his family for leaving him to rot. She tells him about her deal with Daniel and suggests that someone killed him to stop the sale. But Graham is not interested and he hangs up. Susie finds Marshall sulking and comforts him. He doesn't want to talk about Sharni's death and she tells him to help with the muster to keep him busy. Graham arrives, and while Susie is happy to see him, Marshall avoids him. As for Graham, he empties all the liquor bottles at home and then tells Colin that he plans to muster their cattle with their own men. In exchange, Colin needs to hand over the place to him. Colin laughs and claims he is a bad fit, which has Graham whipping him. He reveals Daniel's betrayal and how he hated Colin, who was an abusive father. But Graham always looked up to him and wanted to help despite everything. Colin is impressed by Graham standing up for himself and hugs him, which leads to a tentative truce. Meanwhile, Emily tries to stop Nolan from taking up Sandra's deal. But he couldn't care less about the road from the port via Marianne Station. Back at the station, Graham shares his plan of a muster in 7 weeks, which will get them $80 million. Colin is part of it, and so are Susie and Marshall. Emily shows up and tells them about Sandra's plans, but Colin doesn't see it as an immediate danger. She is lost in thought while Susie tries to tell her how she is the one who has been handling most of the muster. She claims she is letting the men think they are in charge, and this strikes a chord in Emily, who has been doing just that for the last 20 years. The first step of the muster begins, and Graham joins Marshall, who is not interested in his company. He points out that, like Colin, Graham was an abusive father. Graham is sorry and promises to change the future. As for Sharni, Rich visits her and she believes Marshall left her to die. Rich is now working with Campbell Miller and claims they can make enough money to run away like they had planned before Marshall. She is hesitant as she doesn't like that plan anymore. Back at the station, Marshall continues to sulk and Emily checks up on him. He doesn't want to run the station and she shares that he can at least help his family. She tells him to accept Marianne as it is a part of who he is, and he is conflicted. Nearby, Colin notices Susie working hard and compliments her, which makes her delighted. Graham gives a pep talk and everyone is jazzed to start the muster. They have 60K cattle heads and begin pushing the herd in the right direction. A cow tries to break off and the Lawsons work together to catch it. Marshall is having the time of his life and so is Susie. Day 1 is a success, but Emily is troubled. She tells Graham she thought he had left, but he wants to stay and fight. That night, everyone has fun as Graham teaches Susie how to use a whip. Campbell calls Emily, but she says it is over and tells him to stay away. Elsewhere, Lachie is upset with Sandra as he blames her for getting in his head and causing his breakup. He heads out to hang with Ethan Hodge and she is surprised. Back at camp, Graham and Emily patch up as he apologizes for being distant. They kiss and later he tells her about Sandra's theory about Daniel's death. Feeling guilty, Emily tries to tell him the truth, but he thinks she is talking about cheating with Campbell. She assures him that she has ended things with Campbell and he is happy. As for Marshall, he is sitting with Colin, who hears a bird and believes it is a bad omen. The next morning, Graham's hands are shaking and Marshall pours him some tea and tells him he is not alone. The muster resumes and they successfully bring the herd back to the base. Meanwhile, Lachie is smoking up with Ethan and sulking about losing Susie. Ethan tells him to get her back and promises to help convince Susie. Just as they are about to leave, the boys decide to smoke up one more joint. Back at the base, Campbell causes problems by telling the quarantine authorities that there is an outbreak at Marianne Station. The authorities arrive and quarantine Marianne for 2 weeks. Nothing can be done, and Emily threatens to take down Campbell. Ethan and Laquis show up at the same time, and the latter tries to patch up with Susie. She doesn't want to hear it, but he continues to pressure her. Seeing the altercation, Marshall jumps in and tries to make Laquis leave. Annoyed, Laquis punches him and a fight ensues. Susie and Ethan try to break them up, but Laquis pushes everyone against the fence. Triggered by the commotion and Marshall's red shirt, a bull inside the pen charges at them and its horn stabs Susie in the back. Everyone is shocked as Emily, Graham, and Colin rush to her aid. At the end of Territory Episode 5, Susie goes into shock as the Lawsons try to carry her inside. Territory Episode 5 gives us all the works expected from a penultimate episode. Some of the loose ends are tied, like Daniel's death, Graham patching up with his family, and Marshall accepting his fate. There are also new conflicts and impending plot points, such as Campbell messing with the Lawsons, Sandra's deal with Keeley, and Susie getting injured. There is enough to have viewers tuning in for the finale, but for some reason, this chapter feels like a filler with a hasty ending. Too much of the runtime is spent on the muster, highlighting Emily's prowess, which we already know about. Nolan and Sharni's drama is sidelined, and so is Sandra's evil plan, which we already know is going to be rushed in the finale. Hopefully, we get a solid conclusion that ties up all the different subplots which have been going on for too long.